Hello everyone, and welcome to Or This. This is my Monday morning quarterbacking of the scriptures theme and sermon for the previous Sunday, and this video is for Sunday, September 19th. I'll include the references to the scriptures for the day in the description of this video, so you can look those up and read them when you get a chance. But basically I have two brief themes that I want to touch on in this video. The first is a very brief touching on wisdom, which is what I talked about in the sermon, and that was based on the gospel, on the book of James. And then I want to talk about Jesus' message in the gospel about welcome and who is welcome, and talk about how we welcome. So the first part is wisdom, and I asked some questions for us to think about what we think wisdom is. And I have one of our folks gave me this information about a wisdom index that gives you an inventory that you can take to measure your wisdom. And it was called the Just Thomas Wisdom Index. And in the index, it measured a couple different categories that they considered to have to do with wisdom. And those categories include acceptance of divergent perspectives, decisiveness, emotional regulation, pro-social behaviors like compassion and empathy, self-reflection, social advising, and spirituality. So those were 7 categories, and one of the things that I talked about wisdom yesterday is that the wisdom from God, or the wisdom from above, was intended for us to learn how to live in right relationship with one another. And so this is interesting. Some of the categories have to do with the ways in which we relate to other people. So there is an aspect of wisdom measured in that index that measures how well we are able to relate to other people, relating to people with divergent perspectives, pro-social behaviors, social advising, that kind of thing. So anyway, just thought that was interesting. That was one that's this particular researcher, this is his idea of what different categories or what different qualities are part of being wise. So that's the wisdom part, and you can watch my sermon, you can view the sermon through our Facebook page or wfmj.com to see what I talked about with reference to the wisdom from above from James's, the passage we had from James yesterday. But I also want to talk about the teaching of Jesus that we had in our gospel that I didn't talk about at all. Jesus talks about welcome, and how welcome is a very important part of the life of those who are going to become his community, the community of those who believe in and follow Jesus in their lives. And what Jesus does is, to demonstrate this, is he takes a child. The context is that the disciples are arguing about who amongst them is the greatest. And so Jesus takes a child and puts the child among them. And he says, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. And then he says, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not just me, not me, but the one who sent me. And we might almost, if we don't think about the context of the time, we might almost miss the radical nature of what Jesus is saying here. Because children were not very important people in society. There was a social hierarchy of the time. And within the family, at least, of course, it was men, women, and children. And so children were there to be certainly taken care of and then to learn and grow. But Let's just say that children have a little bit more significance in our society than they had in Jesus' day. They really didn't have much significance to the larger group. Maybe in the family, of course, the family cared about their children, but as far as the children didn't really have a place in the rest of society. The children are kind of the least significant people in society at the time. And for Jesus to point to a child and basically tell his followers, because this child apparently wasn't any of their children, wasn't their child, but to say basically that the community who follows Jesus will welcome children. Children were not considered by anybody outside of their family as really important or of any concern. But Jesus tells his followers that in this community, children will have value, and caring for children and nurturing children, they will have value, and they are to be welcomed, even if the rest of society doesn't pay much attention and doesn't care so much. But they are to be welcomed as a valuable part of the community. So it was a radical invitation on Jesus' part of the day. And he does this not just with children, but lots of different groups of people in his day who were considered to be insignificant. And we've talked about those before. If you think children aren't very significant in society, then a child with no parents or an orphan, also, if they don't have any family support, then they were not considered to be significant, which is why Jesus is always talking about the community caring for widows and orphans, because orphans needed support when they didn't have a family. But so we can certainly reflect upon the welcome of children from this particular passage. We can also reflect on the fact that this community that Jesus is building is to be a community that welcomes people who are not highly regarded, who are basically left forgotten by society. And those populations of people can change from Jesus' day to ours, but it is something to be aware of Jesus' wider message. But so I forgot to introduce my special guest here today, and my special guest here is Pastor Dimosaurus, and he is the one who waits to collect the children's offerings each week, and then we figure out, then the children decide what this offering will go towards, what organization they want to give it to. Now, we haven't had children in person, so Pastor Dimosaurus is kind of starving lately, although he does have some money in his belly. But the point that I want to make is that when we introduced him, my thought was that he would be inside the worship space. And the reason that I thought that he should be in the worship space is because he definitely looks like the kind of thing that would appeal to children, right? I mean, I think he's kind of cute too. But a child would walk into this space, and looking around this space might be drawn to seeing something like this, and just be drawn to it because it looks kind of like a character or a toy or something to that effect. But Pastor Dimosaurus is kind of welcoming to children, because they might walk into the space where they see things that aren't necessarily familiar or don't really look like they're child friendly, but then see that this is in the space and suddenly see at least something in the space that is welcoming to children. The other thing I wanted to say is, when I first came here and before I was called to this church, and I was given a tour of the church, they took me to the nursery and showed me the nursery. And then they showed me that there was a restroom attached to the two nursery rooms. And in there was a toilet that was down low, and it was made for a small child. And the sink in that bathroom was also low enough for a child to be able to use. And there was something about, I had never seen anything like that in another church before. And when I saw that, it made me feel as though this congregation had thought about making sure that children are included and welcomed into this building and into this place. So it's important for us to think about, when we talk about welcoming particular groups of people, how is it that we welcome others? And one of the ways that we welcome people is by having something that might be familiar to them, having something that is relevant to their lives, having things that are going to be user-friendly for them. You know, when my sister-in-law comes to visit, I can give an example. I always make sure that I have lemon LaCroix. I don't know if you've ever had LaCroix. It's a bubbly flavored drink, but it doesn't have sugar and it doesn't have sodium. It doesn't have calories, just flavored bubbly water. But I make sure I have that because I know that that's her favorite flavor. That's the flavor she drinks the most. So when we think about welcoming different groups of people who are not necessarily welcomed in society, we really have to make an effort to think about what would make them feel most comfortable in our midst. How do we make them feel as though we care, and as though they could really, find this to be a place where they feel they would fit in? And I think that that's the wider message of Jesus in this passage for us to consider. So first of all, if you've gone to lots of places, if you're having trouble feeling welcomed in life, always know that Jesus welcomes you. And as a church, as followers of Jesus, then how is it that we find ways to make people who come into our midst, whether it's into our church building or into gatherings that we have outside the church building, or even Bible studies, any of that kind of thing. How do we make people feel welcome, that they can connect, that they belong, that they are a part of whatever it is that they are coming into? Because we extend the welcome of Jesus. So thanks so much for watching. If you have any comments either on the sermon or the scriptures or this video, please include them in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our Lord of Life YouTube channel. God bless.